Hi, and welcome to the Soul and Survival podcast with Grant and Louise Bentley. We have run the Victorian College of Classical Homeopathy since 1995. We are both qualified practicing homeopaths, and Grant is also a naturopath. Together, we discovered a link between energy and facial structure based on traditional ideas from homeopathy that have roots going back 200 years. This project is called Homeopathic Facial Analysis, or HFA for short, and has been the cornerstone of clinical diagnosis and training courses since 1999. Between us, we have written and produced 7 HFA books, including Soul and Survival. Soul and Survival is the philosophy of energy influencing matter and how this energy forms individual facial structure, our unconscious drives and fears, our life patterns, and universal time cycles.
Well, hello and welcome everybody to what is here in Melbourne a very cold, wet and stormy July. So welcome to you too, Louise.
Hi there, Grant. I've got a feeling by the time this comes out, it'll be a few weeks down the track.
Oh, that's all right, but it's still a cold, wet
and
stormy July
for us
nonetheless. Okay, so let's begin. What have you got?
Oh, well, look, today, we are fortunate enough every week to get a few moments where you pull up some interesting research that you've looked at and we look at it together and have a little discussion. And today's happened to be an interview with Dr. Georgia Eade, who is a psychiatrist, and I know you're a bit of a fan. So I thought, well, why not? Let's ask you this question. Dr. Eade deals with brain inflammation. We know that PANDAS is all about brain inflammation. In what way has her work influenced the way you run your homeopathic approach to brain inflammation?
Well, she's been one of a number of people that I've stumbled across on a bit of a dietary journey, just trying to find adjuncts to homeopathy, just trying to, remember I studied as a naturopath too, and so naturopathy, it places a great deal of emphasis on diet, and so diet has always been something that's interested me. I've done postgraduate in clinical nutrition, which was sort of mainly the biochemistry of it, but nonetheless, I mean, it was a really important part of my learning. And you can't just the general idea that that diet is something that, considering food is how we replace ourselves and how we provide ourselves with energy. I figure it's a pretty important aspect if you're going to stay healthy to understand what you think is the right diet for you. And that sounds like it would be fairly straightforward, but the reality is that it isn't. Nutrition is still in its infancy a little bit when it comes to, vitamins, minerals, trace elements, all these sort of things. They're newcomers on the scene. Even though we've been eating since Adam and Eve, we have not really understood nutrition and what takes place until relatively recently. And even the science of nutrition has dibbies over the word science, because there's so much cultural belief. There's so many ethics involved with what people involve, and it's all merged into pardon the pun, it's all merged into a stew of ideas. And some of those ideas are purely science, some of them are ideology, some of them are hopes and expectations, and some of them are just, pretty much merchandise marketing, really. And, they're sort of all wrapped up into this labyrinth that we have to try and find the truth around, because it really is an important aspect. Excuse me again, I picked up a little bit of a bug last week, so you're not even allowed to say that, of course, being an alternative practitioner.
Well, but I can add that you did pull through it pretty quickly for someone who's somewhat susceptible to flus.
No.
And
pull through it
you
very
know,
quickly.
you pull through it really well, and we're looking at a lot of people around us who aren't being treated by us, so we'll add. But that's okay. You don't have to.
No. But it is a little bit of a legacy. But you know that thing, you know, where if you're an alternative health therapist and you have a bad day, then suddenly your whole system doesn't work. You go, well, that doesn't say much.
Everybody gets sick sometimes. We all get the odd virus or bacteria or whatever. And I got it as well. I didn't get it as deeply as you, but I
got it from you.
You got it from me. I got a lighter version, but you pulled through and have pulled through very quickly for someone who works as hard as you do. You didn't take any time off work. I think that's still impressive in its outcome.
But you'll have to excuse me a
the
bit.
Odd cough. The odd cough is still there.
The little tickle when I talk is the thing. That's the remainder. But so I guess back to the question at hand is that diet is such an important aspect, because diet is, if your diet's wrong, then remedies can only take you so far. And the problem with your diet being wrong is that some people are really susceptible to the wrongness of a certain diet, and it can, over time, be a real contributor to the pathology that they have. Where I'm interested in Georgia Reed is because I started, she reconfirms what I've already stumbled across myself. She's far more experienced than what I am in all
yes
of
and
this.
no. I think you're pretty experienced with dealing with brain inflammation. You've been doing it for many years, and you get some really great results.
What I mean is that, look, her science would be much better than mine.
But you're interpreting it into an energetic model. You're taking it in a different direction.
Well, it became plainly obvious. To me, it becomes, when you're dealing with PANDAS kids, where you're dealing with a whole range of behaviours that are essentially triggered by inflammation, then it becomes plainly obvious what has that creates that inflammation and what doesn't. And without doubt at all, by the way, no doubt in this at all, even though people don't want to hear it, sugar is a number one protagonist when it comes to this. And the problem with sugar, I mean sugar in all of its forms.
You mean carbohydrates?
I mean sugar in all of its forms. Like when I say to people, you know, you're going to have to watch the sugar with this child. Oh, no, we don't give them that much chocolate. We don't. There's a very big misunderstanding of what sugar is. Plants photosynthesize sunlight. They turn it to sugar. That's their energy source. And then they store sugar. Excuse me. Then they store sugar in the tubers underground. But essentially, when you have plants, at some stage you're having sugar. Now, how much sugar depends on the plant, and how quickly it releases into your system sometimes depends on the plant. But you are having sugar. Everything ends up in sugar.
If it's from a plant.
If it's from a plant, you are having sugar. Now, you might not be getting it straight away like you do with a smoothie. Smoothies are one thing that often I need to talk about with patients, because of all of the different foods, smoothies to me, particularly fruit smoothies, have been given an absolute free pass.
Yeah.
People think of fruit as being healthy. So then what we'll do is that we will smash all the fibre into tiny little dissolvable bits, which releases all the sugar of the fruit into that drink and drink it down, and it's nice and healthy for us. You may as well go out and have a Coke.
It's crazy, isn't it? I say this to my patients too. I say, just think about it, you know. You're grinding it up. You're not even slowing the process down. At least nature's giving you a piece of fruit with fibre and water and vitamins in it, and the vitamins are the good bit, and that's fine, and the fiber's kind of irrelevant. It just slows it down. And But you're mashing it up, and now it's going in super fast into your system, and it's just going straight into blood sugar.
Yeah.
And it's really not the way you're meant to eat fruit.
No.
You're meant to have the occasional piece.
Well, you're drinking fruit,
Yeah,
aren't you?
it's
You're
not
meant to
right.
be drinking
No.
fruit. You're meant to be eating fruit.
Yeah.
And you're not going to sit down there and eat 4 or 5 apples in a row and then eat a handful of berries and then eat another handful of something else and then a couple of pears. You're not going to do that. But you can easily put them into a vitamizer and smash it and then sort of just pay a couple of bucks and suddenly you've done exactly that.
Yeah.
And like you said, I mean, okay, you might be getting the micronutrients that, say, a Coke is not going to give you. But if you're talking about pound for pound sugar, there's not a lot of difference.
And it's really funny too, because it reminds me, we're getting on up there. We're both in our 60s. So I remember when I was a kid, we'd get these stories that were probably written, at the turn of the century. They were quite old. And there was often this story of these naughty children that, it was summer and they found the little fruit patch somewhere out the back while they were allowed to roam in the countryside. And they'd eat all these plums or all these apples or all these whatever. And then they get these terrible stomach aches, and it was kind of like the punishment for being so greedy when they got their hands on the fruit. And the reality is it's too much. You're not meant to eat that much.
No, and certainly not all through the year. I mean, anybody who's got fruit trees knows that there's a limited period of fruit picking.
There's meant to be, until
So, we're not, but then you walk into an average supermarket and there's all the colours of the rainbow down the aisles all year long, and it's just not meant to be like that. We're not designed for it.
So why don't you talk about what we're designed for? What does Georgia Ede say? What's science starting to tell us, and why?
Well, the one thing that I knew was that you need to get sugar levels down as low as what you possibly can, but you need to keep nutrient levels high. So the only products that keep nutrients high and sugar levels low are proteins and fats. And where you find most of your protein and fats is in animal products. Now the problem with that is that animal products are getting such a bad rap and have done since pretty much the 1950s. And there's some people that suggest that there's a whole politic going on behind the whole fat and sugar argument and so on, and Ansel Keys and all of these sort of people that are, well, essentially a war between fat and sugar won, and so fat just gets completely demonised. But that you can do your own research into that. But essentially, essentially what we've got is we've got a food pyramid that only works when you turn it upside down.
It's amazing, isn't it? But when we've tested it. We're into year 5 and we're very happy with it. As many of your patients, you've convinced them to give it a go and they're happy with it too. And there's a basic reason. We've been, as human beings, eating animal foods for quite a few million years, and possibly more than 100 million, however long we've been around. And, we've survived and we've thrived and our brains have grown. And they don't really find chronic disease in the bones and so forth of those ancient humans, but they do in the ones that were living in the villages and so forth, where they started off with the wheat about 10,000 years ago.
A lot of what we would call the recognisable chronic illnesses.
Yeah, like tuberculosis.
Didn't really start until around about the agricultural revolution.
So there is a link. I mean, because it's all about inflammation, and our health really takes a dive when we have to deal with inflammation. It's like this chronic problem that our immune system has to deal with. So any way we can reduce inflammation is a positive.
Well, it is, because now we've got a choice. In hunter-gatherer times, it was perhaps a little more difficult, because in hunter-gatherer times we we're always one unsuccessful hunt away from hunger. And so at least grain could be stored and it could be used at other times. But now we just don't need it. To still have it as the foundation of the food pyramid, expecting that, this is what we should be eating most of, that's nonsense. If we were pulling rickshaws or ploughing fields behind a mule, maybe.
That's just it's
and that's only maybe
quick
you
energy.
get away with it.
And also, too, the people that pull rickshaws and plough fields behind mules are the poorest in society, and no one's given them the expensive meat. They're just getting the cheap grain. I mean, that's a real tragedy that it's occurred for many hundreds of years.
We were all fed this sort of stuff because essentially, people talk about things like gender wars and, males versus females and stuff. What a diversion. There's only ever been rich and poor. We're all in it together. All of the poor are in it. Don't subdivide and try and divide and conquer by turning males against females and vice versa. This is a smokescreen. The reality is that, grains have formed a big part of our diet for a long time. Oats, wheat, rice, etc., because we were regarded as beasts of burden. And it was just cheap fodder. It was fuel, just cheap fuel for us to just be able to survive on. But that doesn't mean that they're good for you, particularly good for you in the modern day life. They're just not. There's books like Grain Brain and all this kind of stuff. It's legitimate. These things with certain people, can be really dangerous. And you just reach a level of sugar overload, and kids that are sensitive to it go absolutely crazy. Now, the thing that I like about Georgia Egg, coming back to your original question, is that she's a psychiatrist. So she was looking at the effects of diet specifically on behavioural and emotional disorders, and that's what really piqued my interest. But essentially now I look at diet as something really, really, really simple. I just look at the human being and say, what are they made of? Because that's the role of diet, is to reproduce our cells, keep everything going, and to supply a fuel source. Now, yes, it's true that sugar can be stored in minimal amounts as glycogen in the liver and, sometimes in the muscles. Well, not sometimes, it does, in the muscles, which is why when you use your muscles, you actually feel pretty
But what
good.
did she say? Only for about 24 hours. Which means you've got to keep eating.
I don't.
Pretty regular.
I don't remember that bit.
Yeah.
I'm just sort of going back to all the old sort of naturopathic things where glycogen is stored in the liver. But she's right. I mean, I don't know how many hours.
I thought she said you're going to get about 24 hours off your stored sugar. But obviously fat can be stored for long periods of time. And
you can live off for months.
Yeah.
Right, and you can tell that it's the preferred source of energy because we turn sugar into fat.
Yeah.
We don't do it the other way around. And there's another thing where if you're talking about, what's important to the human body as far as wound healing, growth, replication, etc., or just maintenance. Well, I guess my question is point to an area of the body where there's a lot of fat and a lot of protein, and now point to the area where there's a lot of carbohydrate in your body. There's no carbohydrate in your body. None. Right? So if you're going to reproduce yourself, you need protein and fat. It's just that simple.
And especially children who are growing and their brain's growing, and the brain is made up of fat, and like she was explaining, all that electronic activity in the brain, it would kind of blow itself up in a way if it wasn't protected by these sheaths or everywhere, which are made up of bindings of fat.
Yeah, well, it's myelin.
Because obviously fat's not a very good conductor of electricity the way water is. And, of course, carbohydrate is half water. So that's probably why there's some link. I mean, I'm no chemist, but in very simple terms, I can imagine that.
Oh, well, carbohydrate, you do just end up with your sugar. I mean, you expel a lot of the carbohydrate out because you're breathing in oxygen. And then a lot of that oxygen combines with the carbon element, makes it CO2, so you breathe that out. And then it also mixes with the hydrogen to create water, which is why you can lose a lot of water weight when you go from a carbohydrate diet into a protein diet. So if you're going to go down that avenue, you need to keep your fluids and electrolytes up, particularly at that beginning part until you become adapted. Sometimes if you don't do that, you can be made aware of that pretty quickly. There are terms like keto flu, for example, where people feel pretty bad for a week or so until they become adapted.
But I think what's important about that, and we had this discussion this morning, is that did not happen to us when we did this 5 years ago now, because we kind of did it gradually, and she was saying that too. She was saying you've got to do it gradually. You don't put your body into shock. You don't just one day jump from one thing to the other. You adapt gradually. You allow your body to just gradually get used to the fact that you're going to reduce your carbohydrates and you're going to increase your protein and fats, and you just do it gradually. And then 3 weeks in, generally speaking, for most people, three weeks, she was saying 3 weeks to 3 months, you start noticing a significant difference, and the difference is health. It's more energy, more clarity. You're not as hungry. You don't feel addicted to food anymore. There's no doubt that plant food, which is the sugar, is addictive. It's super addictive.
Oh, it absolutely is.
And anyway, can I ask you to just finalise this podcast by just commenting on what she said. I thought this was interesting. She said she doesn't see food as medicine. Like some people use different parts of food for medicine. She doesn't see it as medicine. Food is food. Medicine is medicine. But once you get the food right, you know what medicine to give.
Yeah, no, I know what she means by that, is that if you take an alkaloid or you take a substance out of a natural product and then start delivering that back at somebody at really high levels, you're now no longer part of it's no longer part of the natural food chain anymore. So it should be regarded as a medicine, not as a food. A food is just a natural product that you eat to replicate yourself. And it's
whole.
And its whole purpose is not to cure anything. Its whole purpose is to supply the nutrition that you need for a well-functioning body and to supply enough energy, right? But you're never going to supply that energy if you're going into conserving means. And this is one of the problems with sugar, is that a sugar-based diet or a carbohydrate-based diet keeps your insulin levels high for a long period of time. And that kind of means that your energy levels are a little limited because you're going continuously in this up and down spiral.
Do you think that the immune system in a way is interpreting that your whole state is in a state of stress?
Over time it will.
That it's just like, I got stress here, what's going on, what do I need to do? And the immune system starts chugging a little harder and you get a little tighter because it's kind of like you're just on the edge of being sick. But you're not quite sick, but you're kind of on the edge of it.
Yeah.
Because all this plant food, whether it's in the form of wheat or rice or biscuits or crackers or whatever form it's coming in, a lot of fruit, veggies, whatever, they're not as bad, obviously, but they can be if they're mashed up. But it's like your body's saying, I'm feeling like I'm getting sick here. And then it starts overreacting.
Yeah. And often you'll feel like you haven't got quite as much energy as what you should because your body's being sent into a state of red alert. It's being sent into a state of fight or flight because there are two primary areas where the body just does not like sugar. In any of its, forget about the original source. Once it's in your body as sugar, there are a couple of areas that just don't like it. And one is the vessel walls, and the other is the nervous system. The nervous system just does not like sugar at all. And so the more sugar that you have, and any PANDAS parent will sit down there going, yes, I have definitely seen this. See what your kids like after a birthday party, or, they really can suffer from a PANDAS flare if they eat too many grains, too much sugar. Because what ends up happening is that sugar itself, that excites the nervous system to such a degree that the brain will end up interpreting those excited messages as fight or flight, really. And you go back into a fight or flight state. And so a lot of the kids that are on this sugar, they will either go into panic attacks or anxiety attacks, or they will get extraordinarily aggressive.
Yeah, I can understand that. I mean, I know all about it. I've tracked you all the way through. Of course, you haven't really spoken about the remedy, and I think it's really important to point out that the right remedy that resonates with the group that the child belongs to. We all belong to one group, which we call the miasmatic group, or now we like to call them colour groups because we have colour names for them. But if you get the energetic remedy that can calm the energy down, which in turn calms the nervous system and so forth, and you start putting in this really calming nutritional food, animal-based, protein, fat-based food, and really lower the plant food, carbohydrates, sugars, the combination can be quite magical. And what a lovely gift to give your child, to grow up feeling calm and strong and interpreting your environment correctly, not over stressing when it's not necessary. So this, the combination of homeopathy and low carb eating is just extraordinary.
Yeah. And I think when you say a gift, I think that's right. I think that sometimes what parents do is they have this tendency as if they're being mean, or they're denying their kid by going down a lower carb pathway if they do follow this advice, that they're somehow denying them being a kid. But the things that you're denying are ruining them. It's not a gift, right? We have to get over this idea that by feeding them some sort of cake or pie or whatever, just simply because you get 2 minutes of smiles and they get to sort of mingle with other kids that are going to be going off their brain, by the time they get home too. But it's a bit like alcohol, I mean, at the moment, like you were saying, in your 60s, I don't handle alcohol all that well anymore. So you reach this thing where on a Saturday night or wherever, if we go out to a party or a hall meeting or whatever it might be that we do, it's just not worth having that drink or two too many, because for every hour you sort of suffer for about 4 hours. So the risk to reward ratio is just not there. You're not getting enough out of it to warrant it. If it was 2 hours of fantastic bliss and then 2 hours in the morning where you weren't feeling that great, you could maybe even there think, okay, well, there's a trade-off, 2 for 2. But it isn't like that. Sometimes the whole day and even the day after you can feel a little bit energyless. So it's not worth the risk to reward ratio. And I would suggest that sugar and any kind of very sugar sensitive child, any child that's on that PANDAS spectrum or behavioural spectrum, and you can see that they they react really strongly to sugar, it's the momentary treat is not worth it. It isn't.
And it takes a lot of discipline. I think of it, again, going back to our age, you're born in the 60s. The first thing you remember is being offered some lollies, some ice cream. We used to get the cornflakes with the toy in the packet, the whole thing. I mean, we are, all of us, from our age down, even the next generation up, had a fair swag of it too. We have all been indoctrinated, in the Western world in particular, into this way of treating ourselves. It's a treat for a child, it's a treat for an adult. We've just been raised on it, and the reality is it's actually not a treat. It's a very short-term fix, like taking a drug of some kind. They're often a short-term fix, long-term pain. And so it's about looking at life for what's the responsible, best thing to do that's a little bit harder, but it's going to give me the long-term gain.
The moment you're pouring out any cereal from a box, you've made a mistake.
Yeah, no matter what it says on the outside. Yeah, I know. I remember I used to give my poor oldest, I apologise to you if you probably won't listen to this, but I apologise. I remember I was trying to be such a good mother, and mother of the 1980s, and they brought out Nutri-Grain. And then we had this wonderful magazine called Choice in Australia, where they started to investigate things, from a sort of, is this really what it looks like kind of point of view. And I remember they did this thing on Nutri-Grain and said it's 50% sugar, and that's like the processed sugar. It doesn't even account for the other 50% is the wheat that's going to convert into sugar. So basically it's just 100% sugar hit with a big dollop of the processed stuff in there as well. And, but it was brown, and it had a nice funny little shape, kind of looked scientific almost, and it was Nutri-Grain. And you realise it's all just not true. None of it was true. But look, the thing of it is, it's never too late. It's never too late to start again, try again, learn. We've learned a lot. I really encourage people to get out there and learn. Don't just look at one side of the argument. Try to look at two. Some of these people, like this Dr. Georgia Eden, I can't remember the name of her book, but it's something to do with, eat well, your mind gets well. We like Ivor Cummins. Ivor Cummins has got some fabulously good data on food and health outcomes. He's very much a scientific engineer. These people, they're as smart as, they are really grounded, they use science the way it's meant to be used, and the data is, it's unbelievable. I'll just finish on the thing that really struck me. She was talking about they gathered these patients who had really high-level psychiatric hospital problems. Hospital meaning they'd been in and out of hospital, they'd taken all different drugs, done all sorts of things, and really had a lot of difficulties. And there's this doctor she's working with in France, and he got, I think she said, 31 patients into a hospital system so that they could eat really well for at least 2 weeks. I think it was even longer than that. And I think they found about 3 of them couldn't do it, fair enough, but they end up with 28 patients, and they were all taken through this really highly nutritious, lower carb eating. And by the 3rd week, the results were phenomenal. They were 7 to 10 times better than any drug they could ever expect. Just phenomenal outcomes for these poor people that, yes, obviously they've got a problem, a mental illness, but it was so exacerbated by the food. And when they were given the calming, nutritious food, they were just a lot better off. And everybody deserves that.
No, they do. And everyone should have the right to be their optimal selves. And you won't be your optimal self if you're putting the wrong fuel in your car. Your car's just not going to work properly.
Yeah.
And the optimal fuel, as far as I am concerned, and I know you agree, is the higher fat, higher protein, animal-based foods. I don't even try and work out keto numbers or grams of protein versus grams of fat. As long as you keep what I do, about 90% animal product. The rest just sorts itself out. I don't worry about it. But one thing, though, that I would point out is that I don't think that, and this is different to some of my naturopathic colleagues, but I don't believe that PANDAS, etc., are actually sugar-created illnesses. But what I will say is that they are definite. Sugar is a definite contributor to
It's a maintainer.
to the aggravation of those symptoms. But I don't believe for an instant that this poor diet actually created the PANDAS syndrome. But if you think that you're going to get your kid 100% back without some dietary change, now some I do, but I reckon I'd be looking at, maybe 70-30. If you're not going to change your diet, I can still 70%. I can make inroads to a point where maybe the mum still goes, okay, well, that's enough. That's good. They are heaps better than what they used to be. And I can also get them to a stage where they can occasionally eat sugar without the whole house becoming enslaved by the moods of that child. Now, I have to qualify this because, how you say some things and then I get back that, I don't go on social media. I think it's a waste of time myself. But I get comments back from people who do go on social media. And one of the comments I got back one time is that I actually believe that kids should be eating junk food. Now, the only twist in this whole sort of sick joke of logic that I can come up with is that I have said before that I would like to get these kids into a state, let's just say it's your child specifically and I'm talking to you, and I would say, I would like to get your child to a state where if they socialise, notice the if, right? If they socialise and they do have some sugary food, that they're not thrown all the way back to square one for 2 or 3 weeks into a PANDAS flare. Now, that is not the same as me saying that I would really like you to make junk food a staple of your life.
No.
But nonetheless, I think we should be strong enough that we can digress without really falling down. But remember, the key word there is digress. Right? It's the digression, meaning that if you had 80% of animal-based diet for 80% of the time that you are eating, 80% of your dietary time is 80% animal product, you will go a long way if you've got a behavioural disorder that will really help you out. Now, like I said, I have managed to get kids to a really good position without any dietary changes at all, but it's easier if there are some.
Of course. In traditional homeopathic speak, it's an obstacle to cure. And as you would expect, why would you expect a body to function optimally if you're not giving it the optimal food? As you said, and it's not just fuel, it's for growth and repair, it's for brain functioning, there's a nervous system functioning, immune system functioning, there's an awful lot going on there.
Oh, and a lot of these kids too, they're coming into their teenage years, or they're either tween or teen. The other thing that you want to remember with the fats is that not only are most, if not all, neurotransmitters made from animal fats and cholesterols that your body will process, it'll synthesize those products and it'll turn it into what it wants. But so too are other hormones like estrogen and progesterone and testosterone. All of these things are essentially coming from a lipid base. If you're going to deny yourself that and swap it for sugar, you're really doing yourself a disservice.
Right across the board, from young to teens, to young adults, to older people. There are so many reasons not to go down that avenue. But anyway, look, an interesting discussion. And Dr. Georgia Eade, Ivor Cummins, there's a bunch of people out there.
Paul Mason's another one.
Oh, yeah.
Australian
He's Australian.
guy.
And there's some really interesting scientists, doctors who've decided to look beyond what's being presented to them, and then they're testing it on themselves and their patients, and they're getting really good results. Just like us, we're very big on that N=1. And so we just thought, being as we were watching her this morning, it might be something interesting to talk about.
All right. Well, look, we'll join you next time, and hopefully you found this informative. Some people will be pulling their hair out going, what a load of rubbish, because, there's a lot of ideology here. And I've noticed, particularly in the alternate world, Louise, that I've noticed that that people can make very firm ethical decisions on their food, and they can be pretty rigid on it. You can note, my child's on a vegan diet, that's it, full stop. There's no room for discussion much there. But that doesn't mean we can't do something. But, if you're coming with digestive problems and a lot of behavioural problems and you're on a vegan diet, I would at least suggest you be open to the possibility of that some of this sugar might be a contributing factor, particularly if a lot of grain forms the base of that.
Yeah, and it kind of has to.
And that just doesn't mean gluten-free grain.
No, grain is grain. It just doesn't have the gluten in it.
Anyway, thank you, everybody, and we'll catch up with you next time.
Okay, thanks, Grant. Thanks for listening to Soul and Survival. If you are interested in more information, books, courses, consultations, learning more about facial analysis or life themes, please visit our college site, Victorian College of Classical Homeopathy, vcch.org.